Hello, everybody. We're back with Wild Root Journal's podcast. Today, we have two guests, Dawn Leas and John Tessitore, both published previously in Wild Root Journal issues. So without getting too bogged down in any further details, we'll get a brief intro from Dawn and John, just to give you a sense of who they are and what they write and what other kind of stuff they do. And then we'll take it from there. I'll give the honors to Dawn. You were published previously in issue 19, which was right around a year ago, March 2023. So you could take it from there.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I love this idea, this coming together in conversation. My name is Dawn Leas. I am primarily a poet. I have 2 chapbooks and a full-length collection published. I do dabble a little bit in essay. I have started a novel and have not yet finished it. So hopefully someday I will do that. But I love to write. I've been writing since I was about 10. I always knew that I wanted to be a mom, a writer, and a teacher. And I've been very fortunate to be all of those things during the course of my life so far. Currently, I am a teaching artist. I go into schools and community centers and teach workshops. And I also am a writing coach. So I work with people, helping them send their things out to journals as well as editing books. And I am the part-time program coordinator for the Maslow Family Graduate Creative Writing Program at Wilkes University. I live in northeastern Pennsylvania, in a valley in between the Endless Mountains and the Pocono Mountains. And I love being outside. I love nature. I love movement. It really fuels my creativity. So thanks for inviting me to be here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm John Tessitore. And like Dawn, I've been writing since I was a very, very small child. In fact, I don't remember a time when I wasn't. And I think it took me something like 35 years to be comfortable with the fact that I write poems. And in between starting writing and deciding that I was allowed to write poems, I had done a million other things like teach American literature and write biographies of American literary figures and worked for a magazine and also a newspaper. And so it's only about, I'd say 5 years where I've allowed the world to see the poems that I've been writing since I was a small person. And so I have taken the bull by the horn, so to speak. I've published a lot of things on my own. And then I've published it in the last 5 years, a lot in journals, and am interested now in trying to put those all together in a more serious collection. And the one other thing I'll say is I had a novel at one point and an agent. And I was one of those very many near misses that populate the city of New York. So, but right now I live outside of Boston. So I'm really happy to be here. And I'm also grateful to Wild Root for publishing some of my stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, cool. I guess I'm the only one without a partial novel even. Wow. Yeah, and then John, your most recent poem is right from our current issue at this moment, which is issue 24 from January. And you've been in a couple previous issues, number 16 and number 13 were the ones I wrote down back in the archives. So with a lot of experience in the writing department here. So even just as like a starting question, and I'll get your thoughts on it, is when we do come to those moments in our lives sometimes, and we may have those questions of like, should I even continue this pursuit? I think the three of us collectively, the number of jobs we've had is probably staggering in terms of finding ways to come to a livelihood or try. And sometimes writing isn't the primary thing. A lot of times it's not. So when we are confronted with some of those tough choices, or kind of sometimes our motivation wanes, What does keep you going at it? What keeps you writing, seeking publication, seeking connections, seeking, other readers to share your work with?
Do you want to go first, John?
Sure. I think because I put in quotation marks, my career as a writer is so odd, that I kind of face this a lot. I have a PhD in American Studies. I don't have an MFA, so I never came up through the sort of traditional path of finding my way through the literary world. And I came very late. In my mid-40s, I decided I was going to try to start publishing my poems, and try in a serious way. So it really is kind of all uphill for me. And I really feel like I have to not just create my audience and, well, first find them, and then reward them for being an audience, and then also kind of teach them that I have a voice, teach them how to understand my work. Again, because I don't feel like I have the system around me to help define what that might be. So I think what keeps me going right now is it's a challenge of sort of massive proportions for someone who also has to maintain some kind of career, which I do as a writer. I mean, I do as an editor, and I do communications for different organizations and things. But I've taken this pretty seriously for the last 5 years, and I think the challenge of it on its own, just the challenge of finding an audience, keeping them, has been so all-encompassing for me right now that I think that's what keeps me going. It's so damn hard that I don't want to give it up just yet. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think for me, there are several things. Like, I think actually it's just like a pinball going on in my head right now, trying to really kind of sort through where, at pivotal points in my life, I needed to keep going. That is a phrase that I say to myself often. I say to my clients often. I say to my writer friends often. I know a writing coach who's just wonderful, writer and coach, and she says it like it's her tagline, like just keep going. And then I was watching the SAG Awards, and one of the winners of the awards, that was her main message, right? Like, it's always, so if you're a creative, it's always just like, just go around the next bend and keep going around the next bend. So I think I've just kind of kept doing that through my life. I didn't really start to really write poetry until my 20s. And at that time, it was imposter syndrome. I'm like, I would write it, I would go to open mics, but I didn't feel like a poet. And I remember being at an art gallery event for a friend who's an artist, and somebody introducing me to somebody else as a poet. And I just wanted to like shrink away. I was just like, no. I just write poetry. I'm not a poet. But for whatever reason, it's the genre that has stuck for me. I've always questioned, right? I'm a questioner. My dad used to call me Scoop. Like, he would come home from work and I would just like barrage him with questions. And I did work in marketing and communications. I didn't go the newspaper route, really, but I'm always asking questions. I always want to know the why. So I think that keeps me going. I want to know why people do the things they do and say the things they say, and why you might be going down one path and just veer off, into a little pit stop and then never come back. So I think it's like I'm always seeking those answers to the why, my place in this world, the craziness, these times that we're living in right now. So that definitely keeps me motivated to keep writing. Also, I think the community that I have been very lucky to be a part of. I'm surrounded by my closest friends are all writers. They write in across the genres, but I think we're always there for one another when it's just like, why, I'm gonna give up. I can't keep doing this. I don't want to keep doing this. But I know that there are people that I can go to with those conversations and have. And I know not everyone has that support in their writing communities. And I feel like I have found one. And the core of that does come from the Wilkes University program. I'm an alum of the program. I went back in my mid-30s to do my MFA. And for me, I went back because I didn't have a foundation in poetry and I wanted one. And it was, it came along at the right time. So I'm like, sure, I'll go back to school. And but my closest friends came out of that program. We were in the cohort together, and then years and years later, other friends came from that program. So for me, my community keeps me going at times that I am deep in self-doubt and can't keep myself going, and questioning why I'm writing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of envy that. That's really important. I kind of, because I went the academic route, the research route, um, the word poetry almost becomes insurmountable, because what you're doing is you're teaching Wallace Stevens and Robert Frost and Walt Whitman, and how the hell are you going to enter that world from the basement of some English department? So it actually, in a way, probably sets one back even further to go that route, because it becomes because you assign a value to the stuff that you almost can't support as you're sitting at a desk. I mean, there's just no way to do that. That has to come later. So the idea that you present about the SAG Awards made me laugh, because a lot of times when you're a biographer, you realize that some of these people are just the last people standing. There were 25 people in the room, and they were the only ones who stuck around. So I feel both of those things as you talk. In one sense, I know from being a biographer that that's the case for a lot of people, and in the other sense, I'm remembering why I didn't even try to raise my head for so long, which was because I was on the research scholarly end, and it was totally intimidating.
I can understand that. That's one of the reasons we not go that route.
Yeah, that is, I think, maybe even a common thread too, of even just getting into the genre of poetry. And I've spoken with a lot of people who have come to it, at different stages of their lives, but it wasn't the first thing. And there is that hump, even just figuring out the genre. And you can let me know what you think of this, but like, I think it almost has that ease of accessibility, like on a certain level of like, you don't need technology, you don't need a fancy camera, you don't need art supplies, you don't need even like a technical skill, like let's say like pottery or something like that. There's like a lot of technical know-how that a lot of art you just need to get off the ground. So it has an easy access to that part, even just the I don't know, the tenacity or maybe the endurance to write something like a novel. You can write a poem. If you can't make 250 pages, you can write a one-page poem. On the other hand, there is the hump of like, even if it is more of a psychological hump of like, I came from a higher ed background myself as a professor. And yeah, for a lot of those years, like it didn't really occur to me to like seek publication. Why would I do that? Yeah, and maybe it is part of the engagement with it is on the highest of levels. At least when you're putting together a curriculum, you're presenting, hopefully you're presenting your students with the best stuff you can find, and like not so much of like, oh, this person is just like me, or somebody you would run into at the bookshop down the road. So yeah, that's something too. Any thoughts on that kind of the tension of like the ease of getting into poetry, but then also the hump?
Yeah, one of these times it reminds me of this time that I actually saw. I was at a reading, which typically is pretty select community that goes to a reading, but this one was at a big hall, and there were big poets, right? And it was Jory Graham and John Ashbery and Seamus Heaney. And yeah, it was pretty great. And Heaney was the one that was obviously, I'm not alone in this, he was the revelation in that room. And, Ashbery and Jory Graham were great, but Heaney was performing. And it wasn't just the poem. It was the whole, he got it all. He got the sound and the rhythm, and he did the voice of his grandfather, and he did the voice of his mother. And I thought, yeah, that's what it is. That's really what this is. It's a tradition that's like that. It's like a public tradition. It's like, and it made me think too, first time I really gave a damn about words rather than story was music. It wasn't a novel, it was music. And so the Haney thing has stuck with me ever since. I didn't make it easier for me to try, but it became a kind of like, I remember that night almost all the time as something that was really important. because I watched Ashbury be great, but he sort of whispered the poems. And Joy Graham was great, but she kind of whispered. And then Haney was, like almost treated this. I think we were kind of in a church, and it almost became a bar. It was like that kind of a roar that he was making. And so that's one of the ways I think of it as you were talking about accessibility. It was really accessible to hear him read that. It was really something. So
I think for me, I wrote through my 20s into my 30s, free verse. I had studied, the greats in high school and in college. But in my 20s, I started finding more contemporary poets, right? And I found Lee. And I remember sitting with my first poetry mentor in graduate school and her saying to me, "Who do you read?" And I said, "Well, Lee, and I can't actually remember the other people that I mentioned." And she was shocked. She's like, "Well, most people say, Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, all of those, right?" She's like, "And you're reading," and so I think like the accessibility of contemporary poets for me, like, is really what I kind of latched onto. And I'm like, well, I can do this. I can tell a story in really short pieces. The other part is I had kids when I was in my 20s. I was a pretty young mom, and I didn't have a lot of time. Like I didn't have weekends to kind of just sit and write. And I know some people do, some people don't. I didn't. And so I had these little pieces of time where I could write, sitting at practices for soccer or whatever. And one time, by this point, my son was probably in early high school. We're driving on a highway, and this thought just came to me. And it was before cell phones and all that. And I just said, "I need you to write this down for me." And I just gave him like these phrases, and he's like, "That's about you and Dad, isn't it?" I'm like, "It doesn't matter who it's about, right? It doesn't matter who it's about. Just write it down because I need it." And then I was like, napkins in the car kind of scribbling. So for me, that's, maybe that's why I just like really latched onto it, because I didn't have to write 4,000 words a day to, get to the end of a novel. I wrote short fiction when I was a kid, and I love it, and I love reading. And clearly I'm struggling with this novel because it's not done yet, and I keep going back to poems and back to poems. And I have friends who are wonderful fiction writers, and they're like, "We could never write poetry." And I always hear this conversation, right? Like whatever genre you're writing in, you always look at the others and you're like, I couldn't write a screenplay. I could. And it's just so interesting because we're all writers, we're all storytellers. So, and we have similar tools in our toolboxes, right? But we all kind of just settle in. And I think poetry feels like home to me. And so that's why I keep going back to it.
Yeah, the novel that I mentioned, I had agents, and I was trying to find the right agent. It very nearly worked. This whole crazy scheme almost worked. And one of the agents early on said to me, "You need a ticking bomb in the manuscript. You need a ticking bomb." So I'm a little bit of a snob, and I got mad, and I literally put a ticking bomb in the thing, and he loved it, right? And he thought it was great. But in hindsight, I wasn't writing a plot. I was writing a poem. I was writing a 250 page poem, and he was right. I needed a plot. I put a ticking bomb in, and everybody thought it was great, but I did it literally because he told me to. So yeah, so I don't know what I don't even remember why I started that anecdote, but it spoke to what poetry was, which was I was really interested in. This is a great paragraph, and look at the way that the characterization works with the words, and read it out loud. It's great, and all of that stuff. And the guy wanted a ticking bomb. So yeah, so that's to me that's the tension between the two. I can only write a novel if I have a plot, right? And so I need to,
So what did you do with that novel? Would you ever go back to it?
So it was also a rookie mistake. It was very time bound, right? It had to do with a certain moment we were living through. It was a post 9/11 moment. It wasn't necessarily about 9/11, but it was a kind of anxiety that we were all facing in that moment. And in the actual moment, it was very early for that kind of stuff, and publishers were still nervous. Remember, they were all in New York, and stuff is still smoking and stuff. And then within like a year, it was commonplace. So it went from being too much too soon to very commonplace within a year. So it was too current. It was just way too current, and it's a mistake that you do once because the process isn't immediate. It's not like they pump the book out tomorrow. You have to. So it was a rookie mistake. but it almost worked. I almost pulled it off. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's that is funny. Yeah, I think there is there is a crossover element. I think there. I mean, we could certainly list some novelists or prose writers who have a poetic style, and you could almost take a page and do your own like little found poem with the language that's in there, the phrases, and it'd be a beautiful poem in its own right. And then maybe just the last tangent or another tangent is like maybe one of the hooks for me, or maybe the final hook that got me engaged in writing poetry more was like the self-questioning aspect that Dawn brought up, or questioning in general, and then it maybe kind of builds into self-questioning and kind of taking elements, experiences, thoughts from your own life and like trying to shape them into something and seeing what happens. Taking that personal content that can get filtered into a poem, even if it may not be a personal poem or some kind of confessional style, where I think, yeah, there might be a little more distance in some of the other art forms. That's probably not super accurate. But in terms of there can be an immediacy in the poetic form just because it's short, it's there. And I think that provides an appeal too. Would you call your poems or a lot of your subject matter for your poems personal? Would that be kind of like too much of a stretch? Would it be in that mode of self-questioning?
John, you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Oh, okay. I was gonna try to hand it off, but if you like,
I'll go first. Yes, I mean, my family, I come from a large extended family on my mom's side, and there have been moments where they'll be saying things, doing something, and somebody would be like, "Be careful, Dawn's in the room," right? Like I'm just like, I'm very quiet, a little on the shy side, but I observe. It's one of my favorite things to do, whether it's people I know or people I don't know. And so, yeah, I'm always looking for something, and oftentimes it will come to me like. I don't often just sit down and say, "Oh, I'm going to write a poem about this topic or about this person," but it will be in the moment of something happening, and it almost like becomes like that slow motion movie kind of tech thing, and it's just like I start to feel it, and it's just like there's something here, and I need to remember this. I need to write it down, and so there is a lot of personal history in my work. I do try to throw in morsels of fiction to get it from. I do write pretty narratively, so to get it from like the beginning to the middle to the end, I do throw in fiction. But yes, I do write mainly from personal experience, and the manuscript I have that I'm working on now is probably going to be one of my most personal, and it's a little like I keep trying to take a step back and look, and as I write poems for it, if I'm writing about a topic that's just a little too tender, I will change point of view. Like I use a lot of second person. I think in my most recent poems, and but it gives me that distance that I need to see if it's a poem that's going to work, for other people and not just for me working through an idea or a thought.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned big family. That was a big concern because I found that once I started publishing poems, and they are always a little bit personal in some way, it got easier to publish more personal. It didn't get harder. It got easier to reveal things. Like you literally almost become an open book at some point because it's like, it's just another poem and it's fine. But the big family thing was an issue for me. I had to get over that hump, and a few family members, I was not telling them what I was doing or anything. It was just, and I had an older cousin, so he had seen a poem that had a little bit of eroticism in it. And I went to dinner with him, and I walked into the restaurant. And he said, "Oh, the dirty poet's here."
Oh,
and I was like, "Oh, this is going to be tough." And instead, he was very encouraging. He was going to tease before he, and so it got a lot easier from that moment. That's all I needed was just one of my family members just to say it's okay, it's fine. But I did say to my sister, I have two sisters, and I have a couple of boundaries where I don't write about certain things. I also don't ever find myself trying, but I don't do it. And my sisters are one of those things. I don't know why. I'm just a protective older brother or something. And I said to my sister one day, don't worry, I don't write about my sisters. And she said, I'm not worried. I said, you should be. I said, you really should be, but you don't have to. I said, because everything else is here. So you should be worried.
So fun. I have a twin sister and I do write about her, and she came to my MFA capstone, and my chapbook was about our childhood. And I guess I didn't warn her, but she came to my capstone reading and she's like, you could have just told me so I could come prepared, is what I remember her saying. It was a long time ago. But so I write about I have two sons, and I write about their childhood. I write about them as adults. And my older son happens to be a writer now too. So I think they just kind of go with the flow with it. And but the one that I'm working on now, it is more of, am I telling the story too much from my perspective and not taking the other people involved in it into account? So those are the kinds of questions I'm asking as I write these and collect them and getting some of them published and trying to kind of get comfortable with putting it out like as an entire book. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for sharing on that aspect. We could probably take a turn at this point and actually read some poems instead of just jabbering on about them. So I guess we'll keep the order going. Dawn, I'll give you the honors first. You can set it up wherever you want, and then read your poem and share whatever you like, as far as inspirations behind the scenes, how it was made. Kind of show us a little bit of that.
I kind of didn't know what to read, and I picked out two, but I am going to read the one that was in Wild Roof, and I think it was in issue 19, right, in March of 2023. And this poem grew out of a workshop that I was co-teaching with one of my first mentors, Christine Gelanow, at Wilkes, and it was just this great moment. It's a low residency program, and the residency happened to be online that year, and so we were co-teaching this Zoom. So we were all in our own spaces, and I can't remember the writing prompt, but I think it was something like, look around like your surroundings, right? Like look around and see if you can find or hear something and grab onto it and write about it. And I did. And this is about a houseplant. I am not somebody who I want to take good care of plants. I somehow either over or underwater them and kill them. Unfortunately, the plant in this has not survived. So it was still surviving when I wrote the poem, but it's not any longer. So it's called How to Survive as a Houseplant If You Live with a Beginner. Stretch every day until you touch the ceiling. Befriend neighbors with fast-growing vines. Spend afternoons on wide windowsills, flirting with the sun. Invite first blast of heat to kiss your leaves. Be patient, but ask for water before you need it. Change. Welcome the breath of the beginner tending you. Listen. Keep her secrets. Cultivate dreams of a successful green thumb, one she didn't inherit. Hold her fears. Change again. Be slow to outgrow your home. And I have to say something else about this poem. It is about not having a green thumb. It's about the plant. It's also about life changes. I was living alone for the first time at age 46, having gone through a divorce. And this poem was written in a place that was really special to me. It was like my first own apartment, right? And I had been living there a couple of years by the time I wrote it. So I think that's like, when we first started talking and I said that this poem was really special to me, I think there's just so much personal history, tied to it. Yeah. And I miss that little plant. It was a bamboo plant. I mean, how do you kill a bamboo plant? Apparently I can, yeah.
What's the line about telling you that it needs water? I love that line. It just jumped. Before you need it?
Before you need it. Yeah. Be patient, but ask for water before you need it.
I love that. I love that line.
So
That's why I was grinning stupidly when you were finished. I was like trying to recall what that line was. That's wonderful.
yeah, thank you.
I know. That's the line that got me too. Because I mean, it has that depth to it, of course, and you could. How many situations, can you think of about not asking for that water / help when you didn't need it or you didn't see that? You could go on and on and on about times in your life that line could be applied to. So yeah, that's perfection. And I have to say, I think I did communicate this to you, Dawn, previously, but I'll share. Like, this was one of those poems that I could sneak into a class, just kind of like it's very easy to read and the access and to understand it. Because it is about a houseplant after all. I mean, it's pretty simple, but then it kind of allows you to say, yeah, well, what's it really about? At an introductory kind of intro to analysis kind of level, it's like, it became one of my go-tos for a little bit. And I just had to fight back the tears when I got to that line. When I was presenting it in class. That that was the only catch. So that was kind of the such a nice starting point actually in our issue number 19. So I appreciate that. John, you can take it from there.
Thanks. Yeah, I also have one from Wilder. If you had mentioned a few, but I think you missed this one. This one was from the issue 21, July, and it's called Capuchin. I realized when I had to describe it how weird it really is. It starts with the notion that you wake up sometimes and you don't know what the day is going to be and you don't want to face it. It in the middle imagines the alternative, which is a monastic life, which sometimes appeals to me. At least you know what you're doing. But it ends with an image drawn from an actual monastic life. It's the crypt of the Capuchin monks in Rome, where they are buried in the crypt under the church. And then after 30 years, the bones are exhumed and they are put on the wall as part of this elaborate 6-chapel decoration of bones and hip bones and skulls, and it's wild. So that's the backstory for this thing. And I have like everybody else in America, I have my own little podcast I do weekly, and I did a whole thing about this one not that long ago. But it's the right length to read, so I just chose this one. So Capuchin. Behind the trees, a subtle shift to gray, but not yet the dawning, the brightening. Soon I will lift these warm covers and stir. Soon I will begin another changeling day, but I miss my old routines, the monastic order of my life in segments, the specifics all mine. Before I was devoured, my bones pecked, picked apart, scoured, sucked clean. In these early hours, I am skeletal, an empty frame trying to remember last night's dream. Always the same small cell, the melted candle, my aging hand scrawling someone else's lines. Such a good preparation for the crypt. Perhaps the chapel on the Via Veneto, across the street from the hotel where she and I made love when we were still free to roam, and where I might be buried alone, to be seasoned in the soil of Jerusalem, and after 30 years exhumed to adorn a rising sun, Ossian, and know exactly how I will be spending the rest of my time.
I think the one image phrase that stood out for me is my aging hands scribbling somebody else's lines. Like, I mean, talk about an intro to lit class, right? We could really kind of go through that line and kind of get the different viewpoints and how it landed with each person.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. You pull that one out. That first I'm thinking of the scriptorians, right? The monks. But I have a writing gig. That's how I make money, and it's not the same thing as writing poems, So it kind of snuck in there. I realized later it was what I was done with the poem, and then I was going to go ghostwrite some op-ed for somebody, and there it is.
Yeah.
So,
No, I like that one.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, both of you. Yeah, awesome. We have maybe time for like one finishing thought before we wrap up, if that's okay. Back to the experience we've had as writers. So any kind of maybe trick of the trade is one way to put it, but maybe even like a specific example of like problem solving. Here's an example of I didn't know how to do this thing in this poem, and here's how I figured it out. So it could be kind of a generalized thing, a specific example of like working through that one of those challenging times in a poem or in the writing process, and how that kind of like maybe is is one of those elements back to the initial question of like how to keep going.
For myself, I think there are two things, and I visited a friend of mine, her high school class, and I talked about this. More often than not, in the last few years, I start writing prose, right? Like if I start writing, if I'm journaling, if I'm doing like something with a prompt or attending a workshop, I write in prose, and then I pull the poem out of the prose. So it's like I'm getting everything down on the page. It's wordy, but it gives me something to work with, right? To like I like to use the word tinker. Like I can go in and tinker with that and pull the poem out, make decisions on line breaks and stanzas and things like that later on. So I'm not doing it in the moment as I'm trying to get it down on the page. So that's one thing that I do. And the other is I have two poet sisters whom I trust and love dearly. I admire their work, and we do have a writing group. And I think that no matter where you are on your writing journey, if you can find, one, two, three people that you really trust with your work that you can kind of share back and forth, 9.5 out of 10 times, if they suggest that I do something, it usually ends up in the poem. I try everything that they suggest because it's like, why not? They're giving me like their feedback as readers. So I'm always open to getting that feedback from them. So I always try it, and sometimes I go back, but sometimes, more often than not, I kind of stick with what they suggest to me. So again, I think that speaks to community and small pockets of community and where you can go. So those are the two things that I go to.
Yeah, two things came to mind too as you were talking. The first is any kind of writing. When I'm an editor, when I'm a ghostwriter, when I'm writing for a company, whatever. I try to remind other writers that until it's published, it's yours, right? You can do whatever you want. You can try, like you just said, you can try a million things. There's no pressure until it's published, right? There's no right way until it's done. So sometimes people tighten up as they're doing it because they think they're not already doing it the right way. It's yours. It's yours until it's not yours anymore. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just a stolen bit of advice. I've only taken one actual writing course in my life, and it was with the novelist Richard Ford. And it was I don't even know if he meant it as a lesson. I just remember him saying in the class that stuck with me, and that is, when you're confused as a writer, it's okay for the character to be confused too. In other words, put it in the book, right? And that's gotten me through a ton of stuff in all kinds of ways, right? When I don't know, sometimes the poem doesn't know, and that's fine, But he made that okay. It took a guy about to win the Pulitzer to make that stick, but he made that stick. So
I like that.
Yeah, those are all great pieces of advice. Maybe I'm in line with the last one. I have a poem called Uncertainty, so I guess I'm already right. I'm confused. Let me write about it. But yeah, I think there's kind of a lot of good directions to go with those items. And I think I always like to include a little bit of practical advice, or even just a couple, like I said, tricks of the trade, just to try something different. Sometimes when you're just kind of it's not quite, it's 80% of it with the way there, 90% of the way there. So yeah, thanks for those too. So yeah, that's I think that's a wrap. Thanks again for joining, Dawn and John. We'll do it again soon, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.